Introduction to Real Estate Market Dynamics. In the previous section, you learned how the market system works in general. Supply and demand interact. Value is shaped by desire, utility, scarcity, and purchasing power. And price is the number that expresses that value in a transaction. This section moves from general economic theory into the specific behavior of real estate in the marketplace. Real estate is not like shoes or smartphones. It is fixed in place, expensive, slow to produce, and deeply tied to local employment and government decisions. Those special traits create their own patterns of booms, slowdowns, and recoveries that you will see over and over during your career. Understanding real estate market dynamics means recognizing what makes real estate different as an economic product, learning how supply and demand are measured for different property types, and seeing how employment, vacancy, construction, and government policy all fit together in a cycle. When you grasp these patterns, you are better prepared to explain why a market feels hot, balanced, or slow, and to help your buyers and sellers act with realistic expectations rather than emotion alone. Economic characteristics of real estate. Real estate shares some core economic characteristics with all other goods and services. It is subject to the law of supply and demand, which means prices respond to how much property is available versus how many qualified buyers and tenants want it. It is governed by the price mechanism. So the final contract price represents an agreement between one buyer and one seller at a particular moment. Like other products, it is influenced by the producer's costs to bring it to market, including land, materials, labor, financing, and overhead. And its value, like any other economic good, is shaped by utility, scarcity, desire, and purchasing power. If those were the only factors, real estate would behave much like any other product. But several distinguishing features make it behave differently and create the unique market dynamics that licensees must understand. Distinguishing features of real estate as an economic product. Real estate begins with inherent product value. Land is a scarce resource and one of the basic factors of production. Like gold or silver, it has inherent value because there is only so much of it. And it has utility value because it is the platform for homes, businesses, and infrastructure. This dual character gives real estate both a physical presence and an economic importance that lasts for generations. Real estate also has a unique appeal. No two parcels are exactly alike because each one occupies a unique location and combination of physical and legal characteristics. Even in a tract subdivision where homes look similar, the lot orientation, views, traffic patterns, or proximity to amenities make each property slightly different. As a result, no two parcels will have exactly the same value except by coincidence. This uniqueness is why comparable sales are similar rather than identical, and why market value is an estimate rather than a precise number. Demand must come to the supply in real estate. A home, office building, or industrial site cannot be moved to where the buyers are. Instead, buyers, tenants, investors, and users must come to the property's location. This immobility creates risk. If local demand drops because of job loss, environmental issues, or changing preferences, the real estate cannot be shipped somewhere else. Owners must either reduce price, repurpose the property, or wait for demand to return. Real estate is also illiquid. An illiquid asset is one that cannot easily be sold or exchanged for cash without a significant loss in value. Unlike a publicly traded stock that can be sold in seconds, a piece of real property usually requires marketing, showings, negotiations, inspections, financing, and a closing process. Because every parcel is unique and the dollar amounts are large, buyers cannot make snap decisions the way they might with smaller purchases. This means owners who need cash quickly may have to discount price or accept unfavorable terms to attract a fast buyer. Another key feature is that real estate is slow to respond to changes. New construction is a large-scale, time-consuming process that involves entitlements, engineering, financing, and building. When demand increases, supply cannot be expanded overnight, so prices often rise before new projects are completed. Conversely, when demand falls, the existing supply is stuck in place. Properties cannot be moved, and projects already underway may still be completed, adding even more supply into a weakening market. Owners often have to ride out slow periods rather than quickly exiting. Finally, real estate operates in decentralized local markets. There is no single national warehouse of real estate inventory. Each city, submarket, and even subdivision has its own balance of supply and demand, its own price levels, and its own reaction to economic events. That is why you can see one neighborhood appreciating while another only a few miles away is flat or declining. This local nature makes your knowledge of your immediate area far more valuable than national averages. Real estate supply. In real estate, supply refers to the amount of property available for sale or lease at a given time. The unit used to measure supply depends on the property type. Residential supply is often measured in dwelling units, such as the number of houses, condos, or apartments on the market. Commercial and industrial supply is more commonly measured in square footage of rentable or usable area. Agricultural supply is often measured in acreage. Supply is not just how many parcels exist in a county. It is the quantity of property actively competing in the market. A subdivision may have hundreds of homes, but if only a handful are listed, the effective supply is small. Likewise, a city may have millions of square feet of office space, but if most of it is leased and only a small fraction is available, supply is tight. As an agent, you watch inventory levels in your chosen segment because they tell you how much competition your listings or buyers will face. Factors influencing supply. Real estate supply responds to the same general economic forces you studied earlier, but there are also real estate-specific influences. Development costs, especially labor and materials, can either encourage or discourage new construction. When lumber, concrete, and skilled trades are expensive or scarce, builders may slow their projects, limiting new supply. Availability of financing for developers and investors is another powerful factor. If construction loans, development loans, and permanent financing are readily available at favorable terms, more projects move forward and supply grows. If lending standards tighten or interest rates spike, many proposed projects become financially unfeasible and are postponed or canceled. Expected investment returns shape supply as well. If developers and investors believe rents and prices are high enough to provide attractive returns, they will supply more product to capture those returns. If they expect poor performance or high vacancy, they will pull back. A community's master plan and local regulation also influence supply. Zoning, density limits, height restrictions, subdivision regulations, and infrastructure capacity all determine how much new property can be created and at what pace. Government police powers, such as moratoria on building due to water shortages or traffic constraints, can temporarily freeze new supply, even if demand is high. Real estate demand. Real estate demand is the amount of property that buyers and tenants wish to acquire by purchase, lease, or trade at a given time. Just as with supply, the unit of measurement depends on the property type. Residential demand is measured in households, meaning individual or family units who would occupy a dwelling. Commercial and industrial demand is usually measured in square footage of space those users need. Agricultural demand is again measured in acreage. Residential demand can be further divided into demand to rent and demand to buy, and into demand for different types of housing, such as single-family detached homes, townhouses, and apartments. It can be difficult to quantify precisely. Indicators include the number of buyers actively working with agents, the number of showings and offers, net population change, and even the number of households who attempted to move into an area but could not find suitable housing. Demand for commercial and industrial real estate is tightly linked to business activity. For office and industrial properties, demand is often estimated by looking at employment growth or shrinkage in sectors that use that space, and then multiplying by the average square footage per employee. For example, if a local office sector gains 500 jobs and each employee typically uses 120 square feet of office area, the resulting new demand is about 60,000 square feet. For retail space, demand is more closely related to consumer spending patterns, trade area population, and household incomes. Factors affecting demand by property type. Although desire, utility, scarcity, and purchasing power underlie all demand, different user groups emphasize different concerns. Residential users focus heavily on quality of life. They look at neighborhood safety, school quality, noise, traffic, recreational opportunities, and the general feel of the area. They consider convenience and access to work, shopping, healthcare, and other services. They weigh dwelling amenities such as bedroom count, yard size, storage, layout, and energy efficiency against household size, lifestyle, and budget. You see this when a buyer chooses a smaller home in a preferred school district over a larger house farther away. Retail users care about trade area population and income. They look for sufficient numbers of potential customers and enough disposable income to support their business. They watch the level of competition from existing stores, expected sales volume per square foot, and local consumer spending habits. Growth patterns, such as planned subdivisions or major employers moving in, can make a location more attractive by promising future customer traffic. Office users examine occupancy costs and functional efficiency. They consider rent per square foot, operating expenses, and how well the building and individual suites support their workflow, technology, and image. Accessibility for employees, clients, and suppliers is critical, as is parking. A professional firm may also care about how the building's quality reflects on its brand. Industrial users focus on functionality, logistics, and regulatory compliance. They need appropriate ceiling heights, loading docks, access to highways or rail, adequate power and utilities, and enough room for machinery and storage. The availability of a qualified labor pool nearby, compliance with environmental regulations, permitted zoning, and the health and safety of workers are all major considerations. Base employment and total employment. The engine that drives demand for real estate of all types in a market is employment. Without jobs, there is no income to support housing, no need for offices, and little reason for retail or industrial facilities. Two related concepts are helpful here: base employment and total employment. Base employment refers to the number of persons employed in industries that form the economic foundation of the area. These are businesses that bring outside money into the region, such as manufacturing, major corporate offices, tourism, military installations, or export-oriented agriculture. For example, the auto industry has historically been a base employer in Detroit. Aircraft manufacturing and technology firms might play that role in other cities. Base industries attract and support secondary and support industries. When a manufacturing plant opens, suppliers, parts manufacturers, transportation firms, and related service providers often follow. Local businesses such as grocery stores, restaurants, medical offices, and schools grow to serve the increased population. All of these together form total employment, which includes base, secondary, and support jobs. Total employment matters because it creates both the need for space and the purchasing power to pay for it. As employment grows, demand for industrial and office space grows as businesses expand. At the same time, population increases as workers move into the area or household formation rises, creating demand for housing and retail services. When employment shrinks, the opposite occurs. Demand for all types of space and consumer goods declines. A classic example is a gold rush boomtown. When gold is discovered, mining becomes the base industry. Miners arrive, then merchants, saloons, stables, and lodging houses. Total employment and population jump, and demand for all types of real estate soars. When the gold runs out, the base employment disappears. Without the base industry, the secondary and support businesses close, people move away, and the town becomes a ghost town. The real estate remains, but the market evaporates because demand has vanished. Supply, demand, vacancy, and the real estate cycle. Real estate supply and demand interact over time in a repeating cycle. Three key concepts in this cycle are construction, vacancy, and absorption. Construction represents the addition of new supply to the market through new buildings or major renovations. Vacancy is the portion of the total inventory of a certain property type that is unoccupied at a given time. Absorption is the amount of available property that becomes occupied during a specified period. Imagine starting at a point of undersupply, where demand is strong, vacancy is low, and prices or rents are high. In this situation, developers and owners see an opportunity to profit by supplying more space. New construction begins, adding units or square footage to the market. As these new properties are completed, total supply increases. At first, the market may move toward equilibrium, where supply and demand are roughly balanced. Vacancy rises from very low levels to a more normal range, and price growth moderates. If construction continues beyond the equilibrium point, supply begins to outstrip demand. Vacancy keeps rising. Competition for tenants or buyers intensifies, and prices or rents start to fall. At the bottom of the cycle, vacancy and price weakness may reach unacceptable levels. Projects become unprofitable, and lenders and developers pull back. New construction slows sharply or stops. The market rests while the excess supply is gradually absorbed through population growth, business expansion, and normal turnover. Absorption reduces vacancy and eventually brings the market back toward equilibrium. Once vacancy and pricing conditions become attractive again, construction resumes and the cycle repeats. As a licensee, watching vacancy rates, absorption trends, and new construction pipelines helps you anticipate where your segment is in this cycle. Low vacancy and lots of cranes in the air can signal that the market is in or approaching a peak. High vacancy and little or no new building may indicate that the market is working through an oversupply and may offer opportunities for value buyers or tenants. Market influences on supply and demand. Many different forces speed up or slow down the real estate cycle. Some are local, others national or international, and many are tied to government policy. Because real estate is local, local influences often weigh most heavily, but they operate within the context of larger economic trends. Local market influences include the cost of financing, such as local lending competition, bank appetite for real estate loans, and the spread between different loan products. They include the availability of developable land, which can be constrained by topography, existing development, or legal restrictions. Construction costs, including local labor rates and material availability, directly affect whether projects pencil out. A municipality's infrastructure capacity matters as well. If roads, water systems, sewer, schools, and power cannot support additional development, a city may restrict or delay new approvals, limiting supply even when demand is strong. Local regulation and police powers, including zoning, subdivision standards, and building codes, shape what can be built, where, and how quickly. Changes in the economic base, such as a major employer expanding, shrinking, entering, or leaving, can quickly tilt supply and demand. In-migration of major employers tends to increase demand. Out-migration has the opposite effect. National trends influence local markets through changes in the money supply, inflation, and nationwide economic cycles. When the money supply tightens and interest rates rise, borrowing becomes more expensive for both consumers and developers. Higher rates can reduce purchasing power and slow demand. Inflation can increase construction costs and operating expenses, which may push up rents but can also stress affordability. Economic recessions or expansions influence business confidence, hiring, and investment decisions, which in turn affect demand for space and housing. In recent years, international economic forces and currency fluctuations have become more important, especially in large metropolitan areas, border states, and markets heavily involved in foreign trade or foreign investment. A strong or weak dollar can affect foreign buyer activity, tourism, and export industries, which ripple through local employment and real estate demand. Governmental influences are powerful at every level. Local governments use zoning power, permitting authority, and infrastructure decisions to shape the location, timing, and density of new development. Local property tax policies influence the cost of ownership and the attractiveness of certain uses. At the federal level, monetary policy affects interest rates, while national tax policy can encourage or discourage investment in real estate through deductions, credits, and depreciation rules. Environmental legislation and regulations, from wetlands protections to air quality rules, can limit where and how development occurs and can increase development costs. A clear example of governmental influence is a city that declares a moratorium on new building permits because of a water shortage or overloaded roads. Even if demand is strong and developers
are eager to build, the artificial restriction on supply will affect prices, vacancy, and market behavior. Understanding both the private and public forces at work helps you read your market realistically and explain shifts to your clients. Review summary. In this section, you examined how real estate behaves as a special kind of economic product. You saw that although it is subject to the same basic forces of supply and demand as other goods, real estate has unique features: inherent value, uniqueness of each parcel, immobility, illiquidity, slow response to change, and decentralized, highly local markets.
You learned how real estate supply and demand are measured differently for residential, commercial, industrial, and agricultural properties, and how factors such as development costs, financing, investment expectations, master plans, and regulation shape the amount of property available at any given time. You explored how different users measure value and demand, from residential households concerned with quality of life to retailers focused on trade area income, office users focused on occupancy costs and image, and industrial users focused on logistics and compliance. You studied base employment and total employment as the primary drivers of long-term demand, recognizing how base industries attract secondary and support industries, which together create population, purchasing power, and space needs. You also saw how the real estate cycle moves through phases of undersupply, equilibrium, oversupply, and correction, with construction, vacancy, and absorption rising and falling in response. Finally, you connected these patterns to real-world influences: local financing conditions, land supply, infrastructure, economic base changes, national money supply and inflation, international factors, and government policies at all levels. All of these forces interact to speed up or slow down the market cycle in your area. Discussion. Why does illiquidity matter for both owners and buyers in a real estate market? And how might it affect the advice you give a seller who needs to move quickly? Answer. Illiquidity means that real estate cannot be converted to cash quickly without potentially sacrificing price. For owners, this can create stress if they must relocate or free up funds on a tight timeline. For buyers, it can create opportunity if a motivated seller must discount to achieve a fast sale. As an advisor, you would help a seller who needs to move quickly understand that pricing aggressively, preparing the property well, and being flexible on terms are often necessary to compensate for the slow nature of the market. How does base employment eventually show up in residential housing demand? Even though base employment begins in commercial or industrial sectors. Answer. Base employment brings in jobs and paychecks, Workers in base industries need places to live, shop, and receive services. As base employers expand, total employment grows, population increases, and households form. These households create demand for rentals, owner-occupied homes, and the retail and services that support them. Over time, growth in base employment flows through to higher demand for housing and neighborhood services, which you will see in increased showings, rising rents and prices, and more construction activity. In a market where new construction continues, even as vacancy rates rise and rents fall, what phase of the real estate cycle are you likely observing? And what risks does this present to investors? Answer: this situation typically represents the oversupply phase. Developers started projects when conditions were strong, but by the time those projects reach the market, demand has softened, or previous construction has already added enough supply. Vacancies rise and rents weaken. Investors face higher leasing risk, downward pressure on income, and potential difficulty refinancing or selling at expected values. Recognizing this phase allows you to caution investors about speculative building or purchases based on yesterday's rental levels rather than today's realities. Why is it important for a licensee to understand governmental powers, such as zoning, building moratoria, and environmental regulations when advising clients about future value? Answer: governmental powers can dramatically affect future supply, permitted uses, and development costs. Zoning changes can either enhance value by allowing more intensive uses or reduce value by downzoning. Building moratoria can create artificial scarcity that temporarily boosts prices but may also delay projects. Environmental regulations can limit developable land or impose expensive mitigation requirements. If you understand these powers, you can help clients anticipate how planned regulations or infrastructure changes might affect future value rather than relying only on past trends. Closing remarks. Real estate market dynamics are the bridge between pure economic theory and the everyday realities you see in listings, showings, and closings. When you understand why real estate is inherently local, illiquid, and slow to adjust, and when you can connect employment trends, vacancy, construction, and government decisions into a coherent story, you become far more effective at interpreting the market for your clients. In the next sections, you will apply these concepts to specific market indicators and practical tools for analyzing neighborhoods and property types, building on the foundation of market dynamics you have just studied.